Developer Hangar 13 returns with a new chapter in the Mafia series, Mafia the Old Country, and this installment marks a major shift not only in its setting, environment, and story, but also in the technology powering it. This time Hangar 13 has ditched the proprietary engine used in the previous entries and moved to Unreal Engine 5, and this transition is almost entirely successful. On the plus side, this game represents a clear visual leap forward compared to the previous entry, delivering stunning visuals with impressive use of UE5 features, Lumen, Nanite, and virtual shadow maps. It also manages to mostly avoid many of the engine's common pitfalls like frequent stuttering and hitching. Even when traversing the world at high speed, performance remains consistent, with only occasional minor spikes in the frame time graph. The only notable exception is when moving between cutscenes and gameplay, where the hitching and stuttering become more noticeable. And as expected, the game is highly GPU intensive, and unfortunately Hangar 13 has limited the number of tweakable settings and options in the menu, likely to preserve the intended visual fidelity. But with the settings we do have, we can still improve performance significantly with minimal visual compromises. So let's start by examining the image quality and upscaling options. The game natively supports the DLSS for transformer model with preset K alongside FSR3, XeSS, and TSR. When comparing them side by side at 1440p using balanced mode, DLSS4 and TSR stand out as the sharpest and cleanest options, while XeSS and especially FSR3 struggle with a softer and less stable image. That said, DLSS4 in this game has a major weakness. Even when using quality mode, it exhibits a lot of shimmering and noise on foliage, as you can see here. Now what's interesting is that if I force the CNN model by selecting preset A in the NVIDIA app, we can see that DLSS3 resolves this issue and significantly reduces the noise, making the foliage far more stable. So for something like the 3060 Ti, I generally recommend using the CNN model. Yes, you'll sacrifice some motion clarity, but you'll gain more stable foliage along with the extra performance you likely need. Let's move on to the graphics settings, starting with global illumination. This one only offers two options, high and epic, with no way to disable lumen or lower its quality much further. On high, lumen traces against a lower quality SDF representation of the scene compared to epic. This results in reduced GI coverage and less detailed ambient shading for certain scenes elements, as you can see here. In terms of performance, epic can hit hard, costing between 18 and 21%, while also increasing the VRAM usage, so I highly recommend sticking with high global illumination. Next we have shadows. This setting controls two visual aspects. First, of course, it affects shadow quality. In this scene, medium reduces the number of dynamic shadows and produces a noisier, tethered look. And both medium and high also reduces the distance at which shadows transition from lower to higher quality compared to epic. And here we can see that at medium, some shadows like the shadow of this tree are static and don't animate, unlike at high and epic. And as we've seen many times in UE5 games, the shadow quality setting also affects volumetrics, like here where epic produces slightly more defined and higher resolution volumetric light shafts. But in some other scenes, medium disables these light shafts completely, as you can see here. Performance-wise, going from medium to high costs around 6%, and this cost rises significantly to about 20% when moving up to epic. This setting also impacts VRAM usage, and in some cases like this one, even with low textures, high shadows can significantly affect performance on the 8GB 3060 Ti. Therefore, if you have an 8GB GPU, I recommend keeping shadows at medium and using high only if you have more than 8GB of VRAM or you're playing at a lower resolution. Moving on to reflections. At both low and medium, the game uses screen space reflections, with medium slightly improving SSR accuracy. Switching to high enables lumen reflections, and going further to epic increases their sharpness and coverage. The performance impact of this setting can vary greatly depending on the scene. For instance, in this scene, there is around 5% cost when going from low to even epic. But in this one, with more reflections, the cost jumps to 9% from low to high and 15% from low to epic, so for this one I recommend medium. Let's move on to view distance. This setting adjusts the draw distance and level of detail for various elements and objects, such as vegetation, wooden structures, and certain buildings. Performance-wise in this scene, there is around 3% cost when going from near to medium, 5% when going to far, and around 9% when going to epic. So for this one, I recommend far, and if you have enough performance to spare, use epic. Next we have textures. This one controls the resolution of textures and the quality of anisotropic filtering. At first glance, high or epic textures might seem manageable on 8GB of VRAM, but unfortunately that's not the case, because in many scenes like this one, using even medium textures at 1440p with DLSS balanced leads to noticeable stuttering, inconsistent performance, and textures failing to load properly, indicating that 8GB isn't enough, at least at this resolution. For this reason, I highly recommend keeping textures at low, and as usual you can force 16x anisotropic filtering using a tool like Special K or via the NVIDIA control panel to improve texture clarity without any significant performance impact. Moving on to foliage, this one controls the density of grass, trees, and other vegetation elements. And at lower options, some trees and plants are entirely absent, which noticeably alters the look of the scene, as you can see here. In terms of performance, going from low to medium costs around 7% to high 13% and around 17% when going up to epic. So for this one, I recommend medium. Let's move on to effects. When it comes to special effects and particles, I couldn't notice any significant difference between low and epic. Even after restarting the game, the performance and visuals in this effects heavy section remained almost identical. What this setting really impacts, however, is the quality of most material surfaces. On high and epic, surfaces show much more detailed texture weathering and material complexity compared to low and medium, as you can see here. Performance-wise, even here, this setting doesn't have a significant impact, but I still recommend keeping it at high rather than pushing it to epic as a safer choice. And lastly, we have post-processing. In this scene, depth of field remains enabled across all options, but the quality of per object motion blur varies noticeably. The setting also controls the quality of other post-processing effects like bloom, as you can see here. And performance-wise, it doesn't have any significant impact, therefore I recommend keeping it at epic. So given everything we've discussed so far, these are my recommended settings for Mafia: The Old Country. Now let's compare the performance and visuals of the optimized settings against the Epic preset at 1440p using balanced DLSS 3 and low textures on both sides. In this demanding section with all the NPCs and a large number of scattered objects, we can see that the 3060 Ti really struggles when pushing everything to Epic even with low textures, because of the 8GB VRAM limit. And in this scene, there is around 78% performance improvement when going from Epic preset to optimized settings. Now to be fair, much of this improvement isn't just from the settings themselves, but from avoiding VRAM saturation on the 3060 Ti. Once VRAM usage exceeds the available 8GB, the game's performance drops significantly regardless of the settings. But even when testing the optimized settings on the 4070 Super, this time with DLSS 4 quality and Epic textures, we can still see a nice 48% performance improvement with minimal visual sacrifices. Before ending this video, I just want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon. If you are able and would like to directly support my work, consider becoming a patron to get access to the highest possible quality of my latest videos, including this one. Thank you so much for watching and for your time. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if not, leave a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.